Blood doesn't have color in the darkness. It only has texture. I know this because I've felt it beneath my fingernails for 3 consecutive nights, and every time I close my eyes, my mind returns to the exact moment when my fingers touched the damp wall, and the smell, that smell of old iron and decomposing flesh, invaded my nostrils as if someone had stuffed death itself inside my nose. My son is dead. He's been underground for 32 days. Little Axel slept against my chest for just 1 hour after his birth. His lungs barely grazing the air, his fingers so small they seemed crafted from frozen light. And then, without reason, without warning, his heart decided it wouldn't beat anymore. The doctors said it was congenital arrhythmia, a heart condition you're born with. As if life had played a joke on us, as if the entire universe were a curse from Odin himself. I lived 5 days in the hospital watching my husband weep without making a sound. Nordic men don't scream, not really. We bleed inward. The threads of his grief were as visible in his eyes as the veins of ice in a glacier, but his face remained frozen, stone-like, hermetic as the fjord cliff we could see through the hospital window. We decided to leave the city. Oslo suffocated us. Every corner carried the weight of the funeral, the weight of embraces from people who didn't know what to say, the weight of dead flowers that arrived at our flat week after week. My husband, Rune, inherited the cabin from his father 3 years ago. We'd never actually lived in it. A structure of reddish timber with that unmistakable smell of resin and thyme, situated on the cliffs of the Sognefjord, a 3-hour drive from anywhere civilized. It was perfect for disappearing. We moved on a Saturday in October. Autumn in Norway is death in technicolor. The trees burn in red and orange before becoming wooden skeletons, and the sky becomes so grey that you doubt it was ever blue. We carried boxes with our entire lives. Rune placed Axel's clothing into a black plastic bag without uttering a word. I pretended not to notice. The cabin was precisely as I remembered it. 3 bedrooms, a minuscule kitchen with a wood-burning stove that smelled of charcoal burnt decades ago, dark wooden walls that closed around you like the ribs of a sleeping beast. The windows were small, designed to conserve heat from hell in winter, which here is permanent. There was no telephone. Mobile signal was a tiny square of hope that vanished if you moved 3 meters. During the first week, the silence was exactly what I needed. Rune spent his days cutting wood with obsessive precision, each stroke a sacrifice to ancient gods. I cleaned. I cleaned the windows until I could see my own ghostly reflection in the glass. I cleaned the gaps between the floorboards where decades of filth had accumulated its secrets. I cleaned the master bedroom where the smell of age and abandonment hung heavy. It was on the 3rd night that I heard the first cry. It didn't frighten me, or rather, it frightened me in a way that couldn't be articulated with words. Terror came from so deep within that my body didn't even recognize that it should react. The wailing came from the wall, from inside the wall. Weak, desperate, precisely like I'd heard it in the hospital when Axel was 5 minutes old. I got out of bed. My feet touched the cold floor, and I descended slowly to the kitchen. The moon penetrating the cabin windows was so white that everything acquired the appearance of an old film in black and white. The stove still held warmth. Rune always left a small log inside so it would last through the night. I opened it, and the orange light illuminated my face, casting shadows that made my hollow cheeks resemble caverns. The wailing had vanished. I returned to bed. Rune didn't stir. I thought perhaps exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Since Axel died, my mind had developed a propensity for sounds that didn't exist. Sometimes I'd wake convinced I could hear him breathing, that from the adjacent room came that wet, musical sound newborns make when they sleep. But it was always the wind. Always my own mind attempting to repair a hole that could never be fixed. Yet when I closed my eyes again, I heard it once more. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay rigid as a corpse, listening to the wailing emanating from between the walls, so faint you could believe it was an auditory hallucination, but present enough to know it wasn't coming from within me. Around 5 in the morning, when the sky began to display the first grey tones of the Nordic dawn, the wailing ceased abruptly, as if someone had flicked a switch inside the timber. Then Rune woke. I knew because his breathing changed. He remained motionless for 5 minutes, eyes open in the darkness. Then he whispered, "You heard it. It wasn't a question." "What was it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I knew exactly what it was. "I don't know," said Rune, his voice sounding as though it came from very far away, from deep within the earth. "But it's not the first time. Last night, and the night before. I thought I was imagining things." We left the bed without speaking further. We descended to the kitchen and I prepared coffee with trembling hands. When the coffee was ready, we sat facing each other at the heavy wooden table, an antique that had probably been in this cabin for 50 years, perhaps longer. The grey light of dawn gave it the appearance of a funeral parlour sofa. "Could it be an animal?" I suggested, though I knew it wasn't. "No animal cries like a newborn infant," Rune replied. We looked at each other. In his eyes I saw the same terror I felt in my chest, that cold, profound terror that settles in the dark places of the soul where we keep our worst nightmares. The coffee grew cold between us, whilst the birds began to sing outside, a sound so vital and beautiful that it felt like an insult. During the day, the cabin was perfect. Beautiful, even. The sun, when it managed to penetrate the fjord mist, illuminated the wooden walls and made everything acquire the quality of a Nordic fairy tale. Rune went to the village 2 hours away. We needed supplies. I remained behind, cleaning obsessively, trying not to think about the previous night. It was whilst cleaning the cellar that I found it. The cabin's cellar was a place I'd instinctively avoided. Dark, damp, with that smell of mold that lingers in places where light never reaches. I descended the wooden stairs with a torch, my footsteps echoing in the stone walls. The cellar was larger than I'd expected. It contained old boxes, oxidized tools, a child's bicycle from decades past with frozen wheels suspended in time. And then I saw the crib. It was small, light timber, with bars of a smoothness that never existed in modern Norway. It had to be at least 60 years old, perhaps more. It was covered in dust, but someone had deliberately placed it in the furthest corner of the cellar, separated deliberately from everything else, as if someone had wanted to hide it. Or rather, as if they'd wanted to isolate it, as if they feared it might contaminate something. I approached slowly. My torch illuminated the interior of the crib, and what I saw made my body temperature drop 10 degrees. In the crib, there was nothing. Completely empty. But the mattress was stained. Brown stains that could only be one thing: old, dried blood, ancient blood, blood that had been absorbing into the fabric for decades. I heard footsteps on the floor above. My heart jumped. Rune wouldn't return for at least another hour. The footsteps sounded small, delicate, like a barefoot child walking on wood. Holding the torch in my left hand, I slowly climbed the cellar stairs, each step an eternity. I opened the door to the kitchen. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. The sound of footsteps had vanished. I checked the entire cabin. Nothing. Doors and windows were locked from the inside. There was no one. But the smell remained. That sour smell of spilled milk and something organic decomposing. I climbed to the upper floor and entered the master bedroom. On the bed, on the white duvet where Rune and I slept, lay a crib mobile. A small toy, the sort hung from cribs for babies to watch. It was covered in blood. The blood dripped from the mobile and stained the duvet in small dark drops, as if someone were holding it aloft in that very moment, allowing the blood to seep slowly downward. But no one was holding the mobile. It simply hung there, suspended above the bed as if invisible hands were keeping it in the air. I ran from the cabin. I ran towards the cliffs without knowing why, simply knowing that I needed to be outside, far from those wooden walls that seemed to inhale and exhale like an animal's lungs. The fjord stretched before me, that black, profound water that led towards the world's depths, towards places where light didn't reach and where Nordic mysteries slept in marine silence. I remained there for an hour, perhaps longer. I don't know. I lost track of time. When I heard the sound of Rune's car engine on the access road, I re-entered the cabin. I decided not to tell him about the crib, not yet. I needed to understand what was happening first. That evening we prepared for sleep as if nothing had occurred. Rune made soup. We ate in silence. We climbed the stairs. We got into bed. And we waited. The wailing began around 2 in the morning. But this time it wasn't merely a sound. This time it was accompanied by other sounds. Laughter. Children's laughter. Multiple voices of small children laughing as if they were playing, as if they were thoroughly enjoying themselves. The sound came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was as if the entire cabin had become the resonant body of an infernal musical instrument. I got out of bed, but this time Rune grabbed my arm. "Don't go down," he said. "We need to see what it is," I replied. "We can't see anything," he said, his voice so low I could barely hear it. "Because that isn't anything we can see. It's something we've been ignoring since we arrived here. It's something that was waiting for us to come." "What are you saying?" I whispered. The children's laughter intensified. They seemed to be playing something, as if running from place to place inside the walls. The sounds of their bare feet on the wood echoed in the darkness like accelerated raindrops. "My father lived here for 40 years, said Rune. "In the final 5 years, he barely left the cabin. The neighbors thought he'd gone mad. But once, when I visited him, I found him sitting in the kitchen at 4 in the morning, completely shaved, dressed in clean clothes, as if he were waiting for something to arrive. He asked if I could take a special gift. He said it was something the cabin had given him. When I asked what it was, he didn't answer. He simply walked to the cellar and went down. I waited for 10 minutes. Then I heard him scream, a scream so primal, so stripped of humanity, that I knew something had gone terribly wrong. The children's laughter stopped abruptly. "What happened?" I asked, though perhaps I didn't want to know. "I found him in the cellar, kneeling in front of my grandfather's old crib. There was blood on his hands, a lot of blood. When I asked what had happened, he looked at me and his eyes were completely empty, as if someone had extracted his soul and left an empty shell. In that moment, I heard the most terrifying sound I've ever heard in my life. The laughter of a newborn infant, precisely Axel's laughter. That laughter I'd heard only once, moments before his heart stopped beating. The laughter came from the adjacent bedroom, from the room where Rune and I had planned to place Axel's crib if he had lived. We ran to that room. I opened the door and found the chamber exactly as it was, empty, with only a window showing the Nordic night. But in the middle of the room, on his knees, was my son. Or something that appeared to be my son. His skin was far too pale, almost blue, and his eyes were completely black, like 2 bottomless pits. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of welcome, as if he'd been waiting for me for 32 days. "Hello, Mum," he said with a voice that wasn't entirely his own. It was his voice, but with echoes of other voices underneath. "Welcome to the cabin." Rune pushed me backwards and slammed the door with violence. Descending the stairs was an act of pure faith because my legs were no longer responding reliably. We ran towards Rune's car. I reached into my pocket to find my mobile, knowing I had no signal, but needing to verify regardless. We were about to leave when Rune froze. The car keys. I left them inside. No, we couldn't return inside. Not after what I'd just seen, not after... But Rune was already running towards the cabin door. He opened it, went inside. I remained in the darkness, waiting, listening to the sounds of the Nordic night that seemed to want to consume me. Then, from inside the cabin, I heard the most terrible sound in the world. Rune screaming. Not a scream of surprise or fear. A scream of pure agony, a harrowing scream, the scream of a man whose sanity was being dismantled. I re-entered the cabin, knowing that it was probably a fatal mistake. I climbed the stairs, following the sound. I found him in the cellar, in front of the crib. His hands were nailed to the wood with enormous nails, nails that hadn't been there before. Blood dripped from his wrists in slow drops. "She wanted you to see it," said a voice. It wasn't Rune's voice. It was a woman's voice, a voice that sounded as if it came from deep within the earth. "She wanted you to know what her love has caused." I turned around and saw a woman standing in the cellar corner. She was completely naked, and her skin had the grayish color of a corpse. Her hair was long and black, and it moved as if she were underwater. Her eyes were identical to Axel's, completely black, without pupils. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I'm the first mother who had a crib in this cabin," the woman replied, 100 years ago. "My baby died here, in this cellar, whilst I was nursing it. It died because my husband arrived one night drunk and struck me, and when I fell with the baby in my arms. When I woke, the baby was already dead. No one knew the truth. They said it was sudden infant death, but the truth was different." The woman moved slowly towards Rune. She ran her ghostly fingers across his face. "This cabin feeds on the grief of mothers," she continued. "It feeds on the deaths of newborns, on unheeded cries, on arms made to hold life but which hold only emptiness. And when a true mother, a mother who knows the grief of losing a child, arrives at these walls, the cabin awakens. It feeds on her. It tricks her. It shows her her child. But it isn't her child. It's a puppet crafted from all the babies who've died within these walls. An amalgamation of infantile suffering." "What do you want from me?" I cried out. "The same thing I want from every mother who arrives here," the woman replied. "I want you to understand that your love for your son is so powerful that it has torn the veil between worlds, and that power has opened a door for all the dead babies to live again, through you." I saw Rune tense. The nails in his wrists glowed with a red light in the darkness. "What does that mean?" I asked. The woman smiled, and when she did, her mouth opened too wide, her jaws dislocated to permit an impossible smile. "It means you'll carry your son back to Oslo," she said. "You'll carry your son who is crafted from the dead babies of this cabin, and you'll present him to the world as your true son. And every mother who sees your son will want to have a child too. Every mother who touches him will want to form a family, and their babies will die too, because that's the cycle. That's the gift the cabin gives us, the cycle of infinite death." I ran towards Rune, attempting to remove the nails from his flesh, but my hands simply passed through them, as if the nails were made of light. "It's too late," said the woman. "You've already accepted the gift. 3 nights ago, when you heard your son's cry, you accepted, and yesterday, when you saw the crib, you confirmed it, and now, when you saw the child in the room, you sealed the pact." The cellar began to change. The walls became vapor. The floor became water. Everything dissolved into thick grey mist. And then I woke. I woke in bed, next to Rune, in the cabin. The grey light of dawn filtered through the small windows. My heart was beating so forcefully that I thought it would explode from within. "Was it a dream?" I asked. Rune didn't respond. He rose slowly from bed and lifted his wrists. The nails were there, real, deep, and bleeding. That was a week ago. "I've been attempting to write messages to emergency services, but each time I write a text on my mobile, the cabin deletes it. I have no consistent mobile signal. Just 1 bar here, 2 bars there, enough to know the world still exists, but not enough to escape." Rune no longer speaks. He simply sits in the kitchen staring at his wrists, where the nails have disappeared but the wounds remain, as if he bore the stigmata of some ancient Nordic saint. Sometimes when he sleeps, he screams. He screams so loudly that the window panes shudder, and the sounds have intensified. I don't only hear one baby crying. I hear multiple babies, dozens of them. Their voices fill the cabin during the night, a choir of infantile suffering that seems to emanate from inside the timber itself. Last night I found a bloodied cloth doll on my pillow, a small toy made from newborn clothing. I burnt it in the kitchen stove, but the burn left a smell of cooked flesh that lingers everywhere. I found a diary in the cellar, written by Rune's father's wife. I read it during the day, when the cabin is less threatening. She described nights of wailing, cribs with blood-stained toys appearing, the sensation that another being was living in the cabin, something neither fully alive nor fully dead. She described how her husband began to change, how his eyes became hollow. She described finding him one day in the cellar, nailing himself to the wall, attempting to remain awake, attempting to stay conscious. She fled after that. She went to Oslo and never returned. Rune's father remained. And 10 years later, he died. Suicide, the official verdict was. But the diary said something different. It said it wasn't suicide. It was a gift. I've considered fleeing. Every morning I wake thinking that today will be the day I take the car and drive without stopping until Oslo, until the hospitals, until where I might attempt to explain this to someone who wouldn't believe me. But each day I try to drive, the car simply won't start. Rune says it's the cabin's doing, that the cabin won't let us leave, that once you've accepted the gift, there's no escape. Last night I saw Axel again. He was standing at the foot of the bed, precisely where Rune had seen him. He smiled. That impossible smile of a dead baby crafted from infantile pain. He told me we'd soon be able to leave, that soon the cabin would be satisfied, that when we returned to Oslo he could begin to multiply, that every child he saw could be him, that every mother who saw his face would want to have him, and eventually the world would be filled with Axel, with thousands of versions of Axel, each one crafted from the death of a newborn infant. Then he asked whether that wasn't beautiful, whether it wasn't better than his solitary death in the hospital, surrounded by beeping machines. I don't know how many more nights I can endure this. I don't know how much longer Rune can remain conscious in this place. I saw blood this morning in the kitchen, a considerable quantity. Rune doesn't explain where it came from. I'm writing this because someone needs to know the truth about the cabin on the fjord. Someone needs to warn others not to come here, not to seek refuge in this place, not to believe that timber and silence will bring them peace, because the cabin doesn't want peace. The cabin wants suffering. The cabin wants to feed on the grief of mothers who've lost their children. And the cabin always gets what it wants. I hear the wailing again. It's louder tonight, more real. The sounds of dozens of babies crying in unison, creating a choir that cannot be ignored. Rune no longer responds when I call his name. He simply sits in the kitchen staring at the ceiling, his eyes completely white. From which place are you watching this? From where do you hear these words? Because if you're hearing this, it means that somehow these words escaped the cabin. It means the cabin couldn't stop me completely. Please share this message. Please subscribe to the channel so people know the truth about this place. so no other mother has to endure what I'm enduring. So no other father has to remain conscious whilst his world crumbles. Because the cabin is hungry, and every night the hunger grows. Now something is knocking on the door. I can hear it. A sequence of soft taps, as if a baby were knocking from the other side. But we know it isn't a baby. It's an amalgamation of every baby. It's the suffering of 100 years of infantile death. It's the curse of mothers who lost their children and never recovered peace. The door is beginning to open. I have approximately 30 seconds before it enters. If you're watching this, if you're hearing my voice, please like the video, please comment. Please insist that your platform investigates the cabin on the Sognefjord. Please warn others. Because in the end, we'll all become parents of the cabin. We'll all carry the weight of dead babies. We'll all become guardians of infinite suffering. The door has opened, and what entered had no name.